Welcome to another episode of Indigenous Intelligence. Today I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Paul Obina Wilson-Eme, a visionary educator and a cultural theorist whose work bridges historical understanding with contemporary human development. Born in April 1959 to Igbo Nigerian and British parents in Preston, UK, Paul is a qualified teacher with honors in art, education, and physical education. But his impact extends far beyond traditional education. For over 4 decades, Paul has developed and presented lectures, workshops, and conferences nationally and internationally focused on cultural comprehension, with historical understanding as the foundation for what he powerfully terms world citizenship, moving humanity from local family connections to global human family awareness. At the heart of Paul's work are two key aims: seeking balance on all levels and what he refers to as ma'at, and restoring respect for the golden thread, the generative genetic power held within the mother principle, specifically mitochondrial DNA. Perhaps most fascinating is Paul's creation of a lineage timeline, an extraordinary scroll depicting 9,000-year historical continuum designed to expand our comprehension of key psycho-historical events, including and extending beyond the contentious periods of colonization and slavery. Central to his work is the concept of history spelt with a Y, which Paul explains comes from the Greek word heist, meaning womb. History is literally the story from the womb of the entire human family. Through this framework, Paul promotes what he calls rehumanization, a natural healing response to the dehumanization effects that have targeted feminine qualities in world cultures over the past 2 millennia. Today, we'll explore how this information creates what Paul calls the lineage interface, a foundation for becoming truly PC, personally confident and professionally competent. Paul, I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Listen, I have so many questions. So, I mean, beyond the accolades and beyond how I've introduced you, um, tell me a little bit about yourself. So, I mean, for the benefit of the listeners, who's Paul? Tell me about
Uh,
Paul, Paul the man, Paul Obina Wilson-Eme. Who is Paul?
wow. You like to have that's a very difficult question to pose at first. Like yourself, I don't really have answers. I have questions. I keep questioning all the time. I think it's because as a martial artist from the age of 14, 15 years old, I was raised in Zen Buddhism. And I only realized around about 5 years ago that part and parcel of Zen meditation is not the sitting still, it's the ongoing questioning and unfolding of reality that comes before us. So it's not only to question the outside world, but it's to question my inner self and keep up. So as I'm an unfolding article, you're asking who I am. I'm in a state of evolvement. If you see me physically, I'm a 6'2" person of mixed African European heritage, who's been raised primarily in my formative years were in Blackburn in Lancashire, where I was the only child of color. So I could have thought of myself as being just yet another child, but I was the only child of color until I was in my environment until around about 11 years old, and I went to secondary school. So I've always raised up. I've always been developed and raised up with questions all the time, wondering. Well, 1971, Marvin Gaye did a track called "What's Going On." Could have been 1972, but these days I'm saying, "What the is going on?" Because the realizations I have and the growth I'm having to go into to understand and comprehend what's going on. I've had to go and start researching the past so I can understand the present to determine my future. And so that's who I am. I'm a questioner, really, but I'm very proud to say I'm a teacher. And as a teacher, I am, of course, a learner.
Very interesting. Very interesting. How do you, obviously you identify a teacher, but in terms of your identity, how do you, what you said about Zen is very interesting, and obviously a martial arts background, obviously suggests a lot of discipline and routine and a focus. It's interesting how you describe questions because they say you define a man by the questions that he asks, not really by answers. So that's interesting. But tell me a little bit about your identity. How do you identify as a person, your heritage, your name, the meaning of your
Okay.
name would be interesting to understand.
Well, when I was in I went to Manchester in 1986 and became a school teacher. Very quickly, when I'd arrived there, I'd been studying the origins of race and racism due to my own background and things that I'd experienced. And so I have this propensity for fight. I prefer fight. With being a martial artist and boxer and fighter, you know, there's an old expression from the Caribbean. It says, "Nearly never killed a bird." So I said, I nearly hit the bird. I nearly, no, nearly meant you didn't do it. And it doesn't matter if you miss from a millimeter to a mile, it's still a miss. So I prefer to deal with facts, evidence, references, etc. I grew up, I was an engineer as well. That's another reason. So it's about measure. The word measurement as the word sure, me assure. It says sure. So when I got to Manchester, we I started a link with I met a longtime martial artist far superior to me, a guy called Lance Lewis, and we started doing work together on the ground in Manchester as educators. And what happened was people were saying that because I'm of mixed parentage, they were saying that I shouldn't really be teaching Black history. And then other people were saying, oh, you don't know yourself. You don't know yourself, or you're in denial of your white side or your black side or whatever. But I took the name Paul Obina because they're my two middle names. I was christened William Paul Taylor, was actually Paul Taylor, but they added William for my grandfather. But my father, who I'd never met, so in Igbo, he said, no, I'm a child who doesn't know his father. So because of that, he sent back the name Benedict Obina-Eme, Benedict reflecting the fact he was Roman Catholic. And so Benedict Obina-Eme. So back in in the mid 90s, I changed my name to William Benedict Paul Obina Wilson Eme. So what happens is that when I use the term Paul Obina, it's an embracing of both my African and European. My Omunna in my Igbo lineage, my father's lineage, my Omunna. So I give reference to that. And also, you see, in the context of Blackburn, they saw the color. So therefore, I was deemed black. I was insulted with all the usual things that get said um, by racists. In fact, I tell the story. My first day in school, April 3rd, 1963. I went up the slide in front of a Scottish boy who said, "I'll stab you with my petty knife, you black bastard." So I went home because I was adopted into a white family officially. What happened? I went home and said to my mom, I got called this, I understood the threatened with the knife, but I said, what's a black bastard? And she says, oh, some people are like that, but you're not black, you're golden brown, and you're half English and you're half African. And I was like, African? Oh. So after that, I was like flypaper. Any cultural thing I came across that was of African descent and people who looked like that, I was absorbing it. I was taking it in, especially because in school we were reading a book called Little Black Sambo by Helen Bannerman, which is very disparaging towards black people. And so of course everybody's laughing at me saying that that's you. So I was like, mm-mm. No, sir. So we had to have some square ups and fights and whatever. So I grew up with that kind of tussle. So I use the name Paul Obina because, of course, when I started to travel in the 1990s and I went to West Africa, I first went down to Ghana. I did 2 trips to Ghana. So, of course, I was a Bruni Coco. And so I was getting um, some, not hostility, but it was being said. And then when I went up to Cape Coast, of course, you had the Cape Coast Coloureds who were involved in enslavement. I did feel some resentment in Cape Coast. But later, I married home to Nigeria, to Igbo land. I did my Abankwo. Of course, when I was there, I was Onyocha as a white man. My Yoruba brothers and sisters would call me Oyibo. So I knew that the context I would change. So everywhere I've gone around the world, I've become Moroccan in Morocco. I've become Arab in Egypt, and then Coptic in Egypt as well, because my eyes are green. South African colored. Brazil, I lived in Brazil for 3.5 years. I was mulatto claro, clear skin mulatto. Caribbean, I could be red, or depending how pale I am, they might call me yellow. And then if I go to the USA, I could be anything from Dominican, Puerto Rican, African American, Jew heritage, or whatever. So all around the world, I've gone in there, and people have sort of said they put that kind of link. So who I am, I'm Paul Obina. I'm made up of my mother's lineage, my father's lineage, and myself.
Wow, that's that's so powerful. That's so powerful. I mean, you reference Ghana and Bruni Koko and Igbo, and I was seeing,
Yeah.
I'm seeing you laughing because in Ghana we see mixed race people, and we say, oh, Bruni Koko Machi, Titi. We have these
Uh-huh.
these songs that we have towards mixed race people, but it's still, especially in Ghana and Nigeria, there's still an endearing welcoming of anyone who has any kind of African in them. And to be fair, we consider them as African as other dark-skinned Africans. But it's interesting how you
Mm.
express. I listened to the story about being referred to as Mambo and stuff like that. But tell me what it was like for I'd imagine your world was what your world was in terms of the lens at which you saw it. But what was it like being raised by, um, I guess so? Did you have any exposure to black culture when you were growing up, as in your
No,
in your
no.
home, or?
The we I can say to you that you get images in school books or something, and then because my parents who raised me, it was my mother and father. My father was a Plymouth Brethren Reverend, and my mother was secretary of a missionary society. She's in Low Anglican Church of England. And so the imagery I was is, oh, God loves all the little children, all the little children of the world, be they yellow, black, and white, he is precious in the sight. God does is all that kind of stuff. So I never had, oh yeah, then of course, one profound moment. My, I'm sorry, I have to kind of digress. You see, my dad who raised me, he was a prisoner of war with the Japanese. So he was in Changi prison camp in Singapore. Then he went onto the railroad into Thailand, the Death Railroad they called it. So he starved. Um, Only did 3.5 years, I think it was. But they what happened was we had an attitude towards food in the house that you didn't waste your food, and he was very much about storing food as well and making sure that so having experienced these things. So of course, 67, the Biafran War was on, and so there was an overwhelming uh, from the continent. There was the overwhelming images of the children with the swollen bellies and the red hair, and they going around. There were Biafran jokes going on, which I never felt uh, to join in with. I couldn't go in with those things. And then especially I saw black people suffering. I didn't like it. I later, much later, found out there was a song done in about 1971 by Gilbert O'Sullivan called "Nothing Rhymes," and it said, when I'm drinking my Bonaparte shandies, eating more than enough apple pie, well, I look at my screen and see real human beings starved to death right in front of my eyes," and that moved him. And later, Richard Curtis, the director and writer, he said it moved him to such an extent. It's why he started getting into charity work because of these memories. I didn't know I was Biafran until I was 21. I didn't know I was an Igbo until I was 21 because all I knew was you had Nigerians. And so my mother, when she told me about the circumstances of my birth, she said that he is a Nigerian soldier. So I just thought everybody was Nigerian until I met a guy at college who was he was a mixed parentage Yoruba, and he asked me which tribe my father was from. I said he's Nigerian. He said no, what tribe? So I went home and asked my mother because he told me that you could tell by the name which people you belong to. So that's how I kind of at the age of 21 I found out I was Igbo, and then I realized these have been my people starving to death, and because I know I was told I had a brother and sister back in Nigeria, so I could have been looking at my brother or sister starving and whatever. So it might have a thing of revelation and upset and whatever around those things. So I am kind of fiercely proud of or bind with my African heritage, and I've had to understand the ignorance from my European heritage. And so that's why I do the work I do.
That's really powerful. That's um that's really powerful to find that out at 21. Um, and the way that you did. Um, Clearly, it seemed like it sparked a certain interest in that part of your culture because a lot of what I see from you now and what I read about you, your name and the way you carry yourself and the things that matter to you. Was there what instilled or what informed this hunger to study Ma'at and to break down these concepts of humanity? Why what spurred that? Like, was there a specific moment in your life where was it when you found out that you were Igbo at 21 and when you started to dig into your cultural identity? But what set you on this journey that brings
I,
you here?
do you know, so, Brother Nee, I wish I could tell you there was some kind of profound insight, but it was gyal, it was girls. I had two. Now, this is so funny, and I only realized this thanks to a sister who met about 2.5 years ago when I related this story to her, and I'll explain. So, what happened? Remember, I said that my mother, when I told her I was called a black bastard, and she said, "No, you're not black, you're golden brown." So I rolled through junior school, infant school, junior school in quite a rough white working class neighborhood where fighting and cussing and all this business. I had a breakdown when I was 7 because I was getting picked on by guys who were 11, 10 and 11 years old. And it was only till a boy called Wayne Waddington. I remember school sports day, so I would have been the end of I would have been eight going on 9. He was 10 going on 11. But oh my gosh, I was a quick fighter, and they were all ridiculing me for because we'd lost a relay race. So instead of picking on this boy Simon Watson, who got us behind, they picked on me and were carrying on and on and on. This one boy carried on after, and he was a bigger unit than me. And I remember just getting my feet on the chair, and he didn't see me coming. I whacked him, and then I was on top of him. I was wailing in, and then Miss Murphy came from my left, and I hit Miss Murphy in the chest, and she went back. And then Mr. Duckworth and Mr. Roberts, they got hold of me and picked me up, and I was stamping on him as I was going on. And so he would have been a year older than me, sorry, Wayne. And I remember the injustice of that occasion, going in, being put at the back of the classroom, and then I was just there fixed, firm, and I was just saying, you didn't stop it, I finished it. That's how the thing went, and that's where my mentality was. So imagine me then going, as I'm going into, I find out certain information from my mother where she's told me I was born from a rape, my father raped her. So I went into this very kind of, I was bad blood from the age of 11 at secondary school. And then what happened was, I remember I was going out with a girl called Karen Brown, and her father used to drive around looking for me, would send the younger brother to come and call me names and everything, but he'd be looking to beat me up and whatever. Her mother loved me up, but no problem with the mother. And then, so then eventually we finished as 13, 14 years old. And then when I was 16 years old, I went out with a girl called Lorraine Golden, and it was her mother. I went to pick her up one day, and I knocked on the door, and the mother was inside shouting, bawling, calling me a black bastard, yo, you nigger, you're a da 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 da, and all this. And I was like, what the? And even though I'd learned by this time, I was hardcore into the martial arts, and I just hardcore looked at the mother, smiled, put my arm around her daughter, and walked off up the road. That's Rossley Road in Blackburn. And so it was only 2 years ago, as I said, I found out the names of my two white girlfriends were Karen Brown and Lorraine Golden. They were Golden Brown as well. That was the last time I went as a college. I was a United Nations practitioner, as a Jack the Lad, a bit of a thing. But no, I haven't. So I haven't courted a white girl since I was 16, and that was entirely due to the racism that I faced. And so as my coping strategy was to stay with so-called my own, so which are mixed parentage or full black. And then eventually, of course, I married home, even though that's not on now. But that was my solution relationship-wise.
Okay, what interesting. So what spurred the interest in Africa and all of this culture? I mean,
Sim,
there's
sim.
obviously the Igbo identity. So how did you go about it? What steps did you take? Did you take
Well,
courses? Did you travel? I mean, okay, you talked about traveling,
no,
but how did you?
no. What happened? What happened? It's revelatory. So I was teaching, and then in 1989, I'd embraced the name Paul Obina, and then what happened was we didn't know if it was Obonna or Obina, and then from when my mother eventually told me some things about my father, it sounded the name was Obinna, not Ogbonna, because she said he's my father's darling, my father's heart, whatever. That's why he sent the name. So what happened was I was teaching in Garth Prison. I started teaching in Garth Prison's a Category B prison by Leyland. I was teaching cultural studies, and one of the prisoners was Igbo, and he said, "Do you know the meaning of your name?" And I said, "Yeah, it means father's heart or darling." And he says, "Ah, it means more than that." And so I said, "Oh, really?" So he told me a couple of things. He said it also means shrine. I said, "Eh?" He said shrine. Now, what was kind of strange, I've been building building shrines all my life. I always used to put something down and gather things around it as a focus point, whether it be a money box or whatever it be. I just got to build up these things. So I was like, oh, okay. But then the I think I got a book on Igbo names. I wanted to find out more. And there's a book on Igbo names. So that's how I started. There's a book of Igbo names and then Yoruba names as well, published by Karnak House. And so it's just a revelation. That, of course, the African trilogy, Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, and Arrow of God, of course, the first one. I started reading up on things like that, started reasoning. And then around about 1993, I met a sister called Nene Awuji, and we started talking. Nene, she spoke Igbo. She tried to teach me some Igbo, but I'm really got hard ears. And it was just learning all the different meanings of my name, of the Obi, and then how that broke it down into Obia from Jamaica, the Caribbean. They have the thing Obia. And there's a book called The Sociology of Slavery by Orlando Patterson. And I was like, oh, okay. He was trying to find the meanings of Obia, which is Obi, Obia, or Obeah. And so I had this opening of just researching and find out, then reasoning with people. I'm a big believer that we have the three R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. I devised a thing where I said we need another emotionally based or holistically based reasoning, respect, and responsibility. So one's more personal and the other one's more professional. So that's how I say it. So everything was just an uncovering. And then as I studied the thing with race and racism, I saw a video called Free Your Mind by the late Listervelt Middleton for the People program, and then the work of Dr. Asa G. Hilliard that was in Free Your Mind, and that's on online now. And my friend Lance actually brought it from London. We started watching it at my house. I said to him, "No, we've got to stop. I know where there's a gathering of at least 6 black people. We've got to go on." So we went round to my friend's place. We watched it there, and it was like 2.5 hours. And then we did a public. We used the classroom in school and showed it in public, and we started doing showing these things, then teaching class as well to the adults in the Manchester community. So it was so everything's been like that. I've not gone and studied a course. I've been blessed to. Someone said to me, they said one time, "How do you know all these writers, the speakers who come over? How do you know them?" I said, "Because I got a big frigging phone bill. Because in the 1990s there was no free calls. I was making the phone calls directly and ringing them up and speaking from the heart. So that's how I got to know the people, interacting with them, of course, reading, watching, and picking up. But let me say this, Need. The other thing is, I learned when I went back into college at 21, I did communication studies. And the guy there, a guy called John Coops, a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and expected you to be self-determined in your learning. And I had this realization. I did this thing about religion and communication. And all the things I read, it didn't say that the prophet went to the God and was taught a good lesson. It said it was revealed unto the prophet. And so at age 21, I was going, wait a minute, that sounds like I know everything already, and that things get revealed to me. Okay. And so, of course, one influence was when I went to Manchester was the Theosophical Society, Helena Petrova Blavatsky, and she had a book called Isis Unveiled. So there's a statue. It's quite. I don't like the statue much. It's of Isis, and then she's got the face. You can't see the face. There's a veil over the face. I think it's in the USA, a park in the USA. And so, but I got that attitude that already. I know what's there. I'm not what they call a tabula rasa, the blank slate, which is a concept. I believe it's a Greek or a Latin concept. I think tabula rasa. I'm not a tabula rasa. I believe that everything we know is genetically stored in us, and then the stimulation from outside, we get to know what we need to know. I'm sorry for these long ass answers. Apologies for that. For that.
No, that's fine. It's interesting to listen to you. Obviously, these are really obviously personal questions, so I can understand, and it gives me a great picture, and obviously the audience as well. Your concept of world citizenship, I mean, it seems particularly relevant in today's global climate. Can you explain, I guess, how you see cultural comprehension, uh, with a historical understanding, how that's helping people move forward, or I mean, talk to me about your world citizenship concept. Maybe that's a more simple question.
Well, I had a fascination from about 1991 about the human brain, and there's a book, Daniel Goleman, called Emotional Intelligence, and he had a chart in there showing the brain hemisphere. So it's the brain hemispheres theory, the split brain. Some people say it doesn't exist anymore and whatever, but being a martial artist, I know the emotional rational interplay is very important. And so what happened was I realized that there's this thing that people were frightening. The end of the world is nigh. The end of the world is nigh. And I used to say, wait a minute, people have been saying that for thousands of years. But worlds have come and gone. The Roman world, the Greek world, the Egyptian world, all these different, a world is a construct. So I came up with this phrase for myself. I said that our brain is like the earth because both have hemispheres. And I said, what goes on in the brain, we call the mind, and what happens on the earth, we call the world. And whoever controls the mind controls the world. Hence the way we've been educated, or as Carter Woodson would say, miseducated. And so therefore, just by adding two letters, whoever controls their mind controls their world. And so there's a quote from Marcus Garvey. He said that until Africa is free, I'll consider the whole world my home. And so I was like, okay, okay. So if I'm going to have world citizenship, I have to go wherever I go. I'm the consistency in it. And so being a world citizen means I belong wherever I go. I adapt, I adopt, I bring in what I need to do, and I learn what I need to learn. And so that was the concept I have, is that where do we belong? Well, we belong everywhere, but we have a home. And we must respect our home and our home values. And so for me, being of mixed parentage, my mother's line, my umunne, goes through European. But if you go through the theories, they say that all the roads lead back down to that Rift Valley, where Richard Leakey found the oldest rendition, even though they're always discovering more now. So Lucy Dinknesh in Ethiopia was in Kenya, Ethiopia, down the Nile Valley. That's where I'm leaning back to. So the mitochondria DNA that will fire everybody on the planet found there. So that's my thing, world citizenship. And then from the black to the albino to the whitest white you can get, to the darkest dark you can get, all the peoples in between, having respect for all those different peoples and cultures, etc. Love self, then therefore to gain self-love, you can reflect it out to other people. That's the idea of world citizenship. That's my own little thing.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, interesting that you mentioned Dignesh. Not many people refer to her as Dignesh. Obviously, most people in the world will refer to her as Lucy. And
I
you
like the Beatles because it says she was only named because Lucy in the Sky with
exactly,
Diamonds was on. So
exactly.
so
I think it was Donald Johansson and his team when they did that. Fine, but tell me. So you speak about Ma'at and the concept of balance. Okay, how do you
yeah,
define this
yeah.
balance, and what practical steps can people take to achieve it in their own lives? What uh,
Well,
what is Ma'at first, and then what's the concept, and then how can people take steps to achieve this?
oh wow. Well, can I start with this one? That the Joseph Murphy, who's a development guru, late now, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Joseph Murphy did a book called oh my gosh, where's it gone to? I'll get the title back. But Joseph Murphy always taught there's only two natural fears: the fear of falling and the fear of sound, both of which go through the ears. Yeah? So fear of falling and the fear of sound. Remembering that we, from 7 months old, they say we can hear inside our mother's belly. So inside the womb, we can hear from then. So both of my children, with their mothers, I've got two mothers, and so both of them, I was speaking onto their bellies from 7 months old, from before. In fact, I was fighting with my son on my wife's belly. Um, I'd be tapping and then he'd be meeting the thing. So we still got that relationship today. He's 16. So what happened is there's a fear of sound, but then with a baby, they always rock them back, and there's a grabbing reflex. They call the Moro reflex, and that's where the baby, they say, will cling naturally to the mother. And so they rock the baby back to see if they've got that reflex. So it's named for the doctor who kind of named this particular thing, the Moro reflex. So the thing is, as we're walking, we go out of balance and back into balance, out of balance, back into balance. That's just moving around and walking. We know to sit upright. The all the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are operating to keep us in a state of uprightness, etc., etc. So I always say that going out of balance and back into balance is a natural phenomenon. Now, let me go into a deeper cycle, is this. We are generally taught in this culture that things are always getting better. Things are always improving. Back from the old days when people didn't have electricity on tap and they didn't have this and they didn't have these nice domains, these caves who've got now called houses. We didn't have these things back in the day. And so I found it very interesting that they say that we're constantly evolving. So I got into this thing. I was saying, well, wait a minute. That's like saying it's summer all year. We have spring and summer, but then you are naturally in the cycle, you have autumn and winter. And then it goes round. So it's like saying a woman with her usual fertility has pre-ovulation, ovulation in the cycle, then premenstrual, menstrual in the cycle. So these are naturally evolving things, but I never knew. So I said, evolution is there, but what's the opposite of evolution? And it's involution. But I defy you to ask almost anybody what the opposite of evolution is. You say devolution, which means a distribution. So involution was a word I learned some years ago. And I've asked many people, different people, what's the opposite of evolution? And it's not, because it's not taught. They want to keep this thing. Things will only get better. Only get better. The song that the New Labour Party were using back in the day. So I was attending some esoteric classes, and then they were saying that above evolution and involution. So, for instance, now I'm 66. My body doesn't respond nowhere as well as it used to do when I was 26 or 36. So, but I've got to maintain that the best I can. But my mind, my mentality, my spiritual, my holistic being is in a state of revolution above the evolution involution cycle. And so with that, I was looking and applying evolution involution. Evolution is in the myth of Osiris Set. We're in the ideal state of balance, and then Set goes into war with Orset. So remember that Osiris, is deified with the moon. So they say in that myth, his body is cut into 14 or 28 pieces, which represents the lunar cycle, the internal cycle. And so what happens is that division is made, and that's a state of involution by Set. In fact, we still use the term now. We have a set of cutlery or set of tools, so it means the divided state. And then what happens is, in the story, Set dismembers the body, but Orset remembers the body. She does the completeness, but has the one part they can't find, which is the phallus, which then she fashions, and then she brings forward the next stage. It's like a helix in the next stage, and that process is Heru or Horus. So with this, the term for evolution, the state of evolution is Ma'at, a time of balance, and then Isfet is the type of imbalance. So when we're talking to people, we get into emotional states, And it's like someone dies and they say that we're broken hearted, or if someone's emotionally upset they say, oh, I'm in bits. So all of these states are talking about states of where we're not in balance. I don't know, or I'll say to you that as a martial artist and boxer, I've been tagged in the jaw, and believe me, you go out of balance if you don't hit the floor straight a bit away. So it's about our consciousness. Are we fully conscious or are we unconscious? So I look at these things in a very practical. I know I've gone all over the place with this, but it's as simple as this. It's being in balance or out of balance. In balance could be a balanced diet. It could be your bank balance. You want to be in credit, you don't want to be in debit. So it's things like that. We improve ourselves all the time, but crediting this thing that walking, anything from walking, sitting up, all those are practical things which represent the art of balance, the art of ma'at. And then if you want a very practical thing, please look into the vagus nerve and the function of the vagus nerve. The information superhighway down our body, inside our bodies, because these ancient people, the concepts that they have were incredible. And I'm learning all the time about the way that these things can be applied to our day-to-day life. So the information of the vagus nerve carrying it down and also back out again, the way that our nervous system actually functions. Another element there. Because that's the set I was actually asking, why would these people, with all the temples they built, the pyramids, all of this knowledge that they have, why would they say that their cosmology, their understanding of of all and all, which they call ma'at, truth, justice, harmony, reciprocity, compassion, balance, why would they use the feather of a flightless bird to represent the system? Then I looked at the feather, realized it had veins, and that they look like to me, they look like the symbol that we have for if you got an internet, if the internet is on, that we're picking up the signals. And I said to myself, wait a minute, that looks like the information coming in. Well, how does the information get from the outside world into our head and to our heart? Because the symbol of Ma'at is the heart. And that's the nerve. How does the nerve? That's how I realized about the vagus nerve and the internal processing that we have. And remember, the biggest killer in the Western world is heart disease. It's when our heart isn't balanced. It's we're going, all of those things. So I'm sorry, just to say this. At the time then we had the COVID crisis, and they were showing how many people had died every day from the COVID disease. Could you imagine? They were showing us on the television the death rate by heart attacks and heart disease. Could you imagine how the diets would change if the same fear was instilled? And so that's what I was saying about balance and rehumanization, is getting some of these unities with nature. And we connect to nature through our diet, the diet of our body, the diet of our mind. And that's what I want to encourage. The word encourage, to have heart, core in French, is to encourage people to question and come out of the mold we were put into in the classroom, when we had to sit down and shut up and have a doucere, mold or form us from outside so we could work well for people. Let's have a doucere, which is to lead out and question. And, as Frantz Fanon said in the end of the book, Black Skin, White Mask, all my body make of me a man who always questions. And we have to learn that man means mind. It doesn't mean male, it means mind.
Wow, I'm not sure even where to pivot. You've touched on so many different things. It's a lot. It's a lot to decipher. I'm sure. I mean, obviously, based on the listeners. I mean, where do I even want to touch on? You talked about obviously the vagus nerve and And I'm familiar with the vagus nerve. I actually have a piece on the names and the languages in Africa with a lot of the tonal names, and a lot of these tonal names invoke the vagus nerve when you call them. A lot of the rituals and the songs that go into African ritual, names like Nzinga, Mbuzi, Nina, Manche, Manye, Nkanda, uh, Mbuti. These names invoke the vagus nerve, and then you talked about sound vibrations through the fetus, where I guess another way to describe it is essentially the first one of the first organs that is developed in the fetus is his hearing before the fetus can smell
Hmm.
or eat. It can communicate via the sound vibration. So it's interesting that you speak about, speaking to the womb of your children's mother. I think that was a powerful submission. Um, so let's I want to go into this timeline a little bit because it covers an impressive 9,000 year historical continuum. What inspired you to create that, and what are some of the most inspiring things that you've uncovered, or maybe some patterns you've discovered through this work?
The simple thing was the mixed parentage status, because all I was getting was that all the great achievements done in history on the planet, whatever, were done by European people. And then what happened was I started to question that. As I say, wait, what about this? And then a big revelation: Egypt is in Africa. So they were talking about ancient Egypt. So I started looking. Well, then I saw something when I was at college. So I'd be in my 20s, and I saw, oh, well, I think I'd done something 1986, 85, 86. I'd drawn a chart, and it just said, well, here is this is where ancient Greece begins, and then this is where ancient Egypt begins, and that was only the dynastic period. So I did a chart showing a comparison, and this was I think this is an essay I submitted into school about, into college, sorry, about the schooling of black children. And so I'd done this thing, and then one day, a lady called Melanie Pettifer, who was a colleague in school, she was a math teacher. She came to me, and I was hot-headed and ignorant. Some people say I still am, especially my ex-wife. Anyway, I was hot-headed, and so what happened was, she asked me, she said, "Paul, do you have any information about the pyramids?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got enough." I said, "What aspect?" And she says, "Well, I heard that Pythagoras' theory was used to build the pyramids." So of course I kick off. How could it be Pythagoras' theory? The pyramids are built, 2,000 years before Pythagoras, blah 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 blah. What was it, 1,600 or whatever? And I just reacted like that, and then I went to my friend's house. I was meeting my friend at his home. So I asked his mother to borrow a ruler. So I got a ruler and a pen, and I drew my first timeline with a comparison on to justify my ignorant behavior. So that's that's how I did my first timeline as such, and that was between Pythagoras and the pyramids, the age of the step pyramid of Saqqara, that in that short chronology nonsense. So anyway, from that, um, I then saw Free Your Mind in '89 by Asa Hilliard, and Hilliard gave a vertical. He did a vertical. In fact, I'm looking at a version of it over there, a vertical timeline, but I read from left to right. So I did my first ever timeline in 1989, like a piece of artwork with insulation tape marking out the duration strips for the for the civilizations. So that's how I got into it. So Pythagoras, really, thank you for that, because I had to do that. the nonsense people keep saying that Egypt's in the Middle East, it's not in Africa. Should try walking from Alexandria down to Luxor. Then that'd be a funny one. You'll find out how how it is and it isn't distance wise. What were some of the pertinent points? Realizing that the BC AD structure was originated just AD only in the equivalent date of 525 AD 525 by a Scythian southern Russian monk called Dionysius Exiguus at the behest of Pope John I. So it was an actual invention, and it was because the Western Roman Empire was arguing with the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, and the Western Roman Empire wanted to be able to designate the Paschal tables, that say when things happen, basically. And so Dionysius Exiguus, in his own brilliance, dated it from the foundation of Rome, which in the equivalent date is 753 BC. But you must remember, there was no BC either. They only dealt with AD. They were stopping time and starting it off again. And so that's when that I found fascinating. And then 200 years after, the Venerable Bede in England, he introduced the term BC. So he had Anno Domini, Year of the Lord, and then the Venerable Bede invented BC. So these are all constructs. They're all inventions. These are things that are made up, and I find it fascinating because of the way we don't question. We just say, "Yeah, I believe that." And so it's things like that. I think those are the two key things that I found very, very interesting. And so to differentiate the nonsense, because what they did basically is stop time and start counting it off again and say this is the Christian era. They try to say Christian era now. Well, I know it's still AD, the Christian era, just CE and BCE. I find it interesting, as soon as we're born, we're given a relationship to the date they say Jesus of Nazareth was born. As soon as we're born, and then now no one questions. If I say it's 2025, we don't question it. But if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're a Buddhist, all these other people have got their different time scales and time frames, but it was standardized. So just let me give you there's a lyric from a song called "The Man's Too Strong" by Dire Straits. Mark Knopfler wrote this, and it said, "I'm just an aging drummer boy, and in the wars I used to play, and I've called a tune to many a torture session. Now they say I'm a war criminal, and I'm fading away. Father, please hear my confession." Check this now. It says, "I have legalized robbery. I've called it belief. I've run with the money and hid like a thief. Rewritten history with armies of my crooks. Invented memories. I did burn all the books. But you can still hear his laughter. You can still hear his song. The man's too big. The man's too strong." And what I'd like to say to you, the mind is too big. The mind is too strong, because that's what the word man means, is mind. And so it's about getting this this processor called the brain, and what's going on in it, the mind, starting to use more and more and more of it, which I call rehumanization. But deeper still, the longest journey in the universe, they say, is from the mind to the heart, down that Vegas path. So that's that's the key thing that I think I'd say. So I have to differentiate BC in red, AD in blue. Hopefully the future will be purple. There'll be a mix and synthesis of the right and left hemisphere, and we'll get things moving well together.
Wow, wow, that's interesting. I'm just listening to a lot of what you're sharing. So I mean, you've been clearly, I mean, this has been a journey. I mean, you touch on so many things, and it's funny. I had a question about rehumanization, but you obviously touched on it. But talk to me about, I mean, you've been around since what, the late 60s through the 70s through the 80s. You talked about conferences that you've been involved in in creating and all of these people that you've met. But I guess the question is, have you um, through all of these decades that you've worked, have you seen attitudes towards cultural comprehensions change? Is there any, have you seen things change between the last 40 years?
I I'd say that the key moment for me. Okay, there are two key moments. One is a speech by Dr. Naim Akbar from 1984 called "The Nile Via Origin of the Science of the Mind." That's actually online as well now. Absolutely fascinated me, and I always say I always remember when I listened to that, I'd come out of Garth prison having taught there in the afternoon, and I put it as a tape. I put it on in the car, and I was just like, "What?" And it introduced the whole idea of the brain hemispheres and um, the relationship with the Neteru of Kemet, so the masculine and feminine natures of God, natures of the one God. So that was an opening for me on my consciousness. Um, the road, I mean, there's been several of them, but that was a notable one. Now, what happened was that was 1991. Wayne Chandler came to present in my classroom, school classroom, and he was talking about the idea of the great year. So after the day, the rotation of the Earth, well, I am a globalist, sorry, I'm not a flat earther. So one rotation of the Earth around its axis is a day. The moon around the Earth, orbiting the Earth, is a month. The sun and moon orbiting the sun, the Earth and moon orbiting the sun is a year. The next natural movement after that is the movement of the universe itself, which we call the Great Year, around approximately 2,150 years. We're currently moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. Interestingly enough, BCAD aligns with that concept because it went from Aries into Pisces. So the countdown goes from whatever millions you want to do down to 1 BC, then it goes to AD 1 and starts counting up again. And so that was a fascinating thing for me. Now, the comprehension of time and how we get manipulated into beliefs. I always hear the word manipulated. I say mind, ip, power is the ip is a Greek for horse. So if you see discipline, ip is in there. So if you manipulate, it's to kill your mind power. Late means dead. So we get manipulated in different ways. So we don't comprehend, we don't look, we don't understand. And so for me, religion has been a key in locking people down. And what Wayne Chandler said in his presentation, he said that as we ending and going into this next phase, there'll be changes in the electromagnetic phases of the earth, the influences of the earth. You're going to see extremes of religion, religious conformity, and development of spiritual awareness as well. And so, in some cases, there are people who are religious are definitively not spiritual, and the people who are spiritual are not religious. So we're going to be going through all these kind of balances and balancing out and everything else. So that's what I've found changes. There's certain things that I could talk about, like for instance, at one time I could possibly talk about voodoo, hoodoo, obia, anything like that. You couldn't talk about that to a black audience, especially Caribbean audience. You couldn't talk about those things. If you talked about Dibia, Adibia, or a Babalawo to your Yoruba family, they'd be, it'd be like, oh, no, we're Christians, we're Muslims, and whatever. But now more and more, unity with nature is taking place. And that unity with nature means your natural relationship. For instance, Yoruba people, the name of Yoruba religion is Yoruba. The name of Igbo religion is Igbo. There's no separation from who and what you are and what your faith is and through the land. But they persuaded us that what we practiced was pagan, was evil, was wicked. Not understanding they were butchering each other's like chickens over grounds of Catholic and Protestant or sectarian violence and whatever. The fact that we're murdering people around the world and the planet to gain land and access to resources. No, we don't think about that. We're Christian and that's the only way. So have I seen a change? There's more discussion taking place. And of course, this young man called Ryan Coogler has just done a major piece of Sinners, which has got all manner of dynamics in it. And if you look into the background history of everything, it's an amazing piece of work and calls a lot of things into question.
You're not the only one to speak about this Sinners movie. I need to go see it. A cousin of mine referenced the timeline, which is similar to, you know what I mean? I think you also talked about the timeline where it talks about how it shifts through different eras, without putting any spoilers out. But I'm glad to obviously hear that, yes, there does seem to be a shift to me. I mean, the gentleman that stars in the movie, is it Michael B. Jordan? His mother is a
Yeah,
Babalawo.
yeah.
His mother is a Babalawo, and he studied Ifa, and is quite a culturally centered young man. And it's interesting to start to see those types of personalities start to permeate the movie industry, and put those messages out. So I think, I speak to a number of, obviously, people who want to reflect African culture, and they're using different mediums, in terms of, how the story is told. I think younger kids now, or the newer generation, have an appeal to this type Wakanda AI type, um, messaging. So it's I've seen people creating all types of videos and using different mediums, and I think that's important because sometimes the messaging can be heavy when it comes to podcasts and, some of these heavy discussions. So I think, no matter how the message is put out, I definitely think, there is an awakening, or an interest, as you said, based on the era that we're in. That's
Hmm.
definitely another conversation. It's when I'm yet to further explore into where we are really in the calendar. When you start to realign the calendar to African calendars, then you start to think, we
Yeah,
wait,
yeah.
we're not actually in the eras that we think. So that's another interesting conversation. So, let me ask you this: How, um, I guess, if somebody was beginning their journey into self-discovery,
Hmm.
you have a very interesting story, and as you narrated, you shared some things that obviously, I'm happy that you shared, because obviously some of these things are painful. Being in these situations, growing up in a predominantly white country and being mixed race. So for anyone out there who may be listening, or may feel isolated as a mixed race child growing up in the West, or and to black kids as well, it doesn't necessarily have to be mixed race, but what steps would you recommend for people who are trying to rediscover themselves, and people who are, kind of questioning, or on the beginning in their journey to comprehend things culturally in the world? What would you, okay, so I guess the message, what would you tell people who are trying to reconcile that culture and the world citizenship?
I I'll say to you what I've really my daughter now is 34, my son is 16, just turned 16. There's almost 18, 17 years something between the two from one relationship and then the next relationship. And So my son has benefited from 18 years of experience. So when he was born, I was 50 years old. And so the 50-year-old Paul is not the 30-year-old Paul, if you see what I'm saying, the 32-year-old Paul. And so I've had a great amount of reflection, healing, etc., etc. Now, the greatest, there's an old song written by Michael, is it Michael? I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was sung by George Benson anyway, Michael Massa. It's called The Greatest Love of All. And that song's lyric, I believe it was murdered by Whitney Houston. So she was on my list, by the way, but she left already. So what happened is, it ends up, it says, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Now, that can sound glib, but the one thing I find hard to do personally is to look at myself in the mirror and like what I see, and to write about myself as being something of worth. So for instance, when you said to me um, about do I have a bio, I write terrible bios for myself. I don't know what to say. I just go, oh, I'm not really here, or whatever. I think it was only 6 years ago I ever put a photograph of myself on publicity. That was because I was taught and trained to hate myself formatively in Blackburn. And so I had big lips. I had, I was black and ugly, black and stupid. So all the things usually afforded to black people, even though I'm mixed race and I'm relatively light skinned, they they persuaded me because of the context I was in that I was ugly, I was black, I was unusual, I was looking this and that. So my first formative years, I was led to believe, even though I was a natural leader and a fighter and whatever, I protect people, I was useless. I was not good. Then that further impacted with my mother telling me I was born from a rape. So that doubly said I was born from bad blood. So I've never been stable in how I feel about myself. So people starting off in personal journey. I always remember a track from Hotter Than July from Stevie Wonder, and I think for early 80s, about 81, 82. And it says cash in your face. It said you might have the cash, but you can't cash in your face. And he was talking about the redlining in the United States about where you go and live. And so I'd say that the promotion of self-love. One thing you must remember, there's a book by Dr. Naim Akbar called Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. And in the second half of that, it's only a small book, powerful book. And in the second half, it talks about religious imagery and icons that don't look like you. So the idea, for instance, when I went to Ghana first time, is it Kokoto Airport? I
Kutuka,
remember
Kutuka
Kotoka,
Airport. Yeah,
Kotoka
Kutuka.
Airport. I remember arriving at dusk and it was beautiful, golden brown. The sun was setting and it was like, wow. And I was like, whoa. And steps out, the heat hit me from the plane. Went through the terminal, were picked up, and then I looked and I saw a picture of Jesus that looked like General Custer, blonde haired, blue eyes, an image that you couldn't even sell that in the UK. This is 1990 in Ghana. And then I was like, what? And I seen the Lord is my shepherd supermarket, praise the Lord hairdressers. I was like, oh my gosh. I said, my mother's people's been to town here. And it's literally like that for me, the Christianization process. It was on my second journey to Ghana. I nearly died in a car accident because I was hailing a taxi to go to oh, no, no, no. It was 1990. I was going from La Bonnie Secondary School to the National Theatre. And I stopped a taxi. And of course, he gave me a Bruni price when I got into the taxi. I says, how much? I said, how much and he gave me a Bruni price. I said, I said, you're Nigerian, aren't you? So what do you don't call a Ghanaian Nigerian, but I knew enough to wind this guy up. And And he said, no, no, no. He says, I'm Ghanaian. I says, oh, don't give me Lagos price. Give me a fair price. And so he did. And then we're driving along. He was making conversation. And he says, oh, a lot of your people have been coming here recently. And I said, who, which people? He said, white people. So oh, okay, okay. So I start to laugh because I understand the context. I'm considered white over in West Africa. So I then driving on, so my mischief came, and I says, "Oh, I see, sir, you're born again." He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "So you have a relationship with Jesus?" He said, "Jesus is my Lord and Savior, sir." I says, "Oh, what color is Jesus?" He said, "Jesus is white." And I said, "So what color is God?" He said, "God is white." And I said, "So what color is the devil?" He said, "The Satan. Satan is black." And I said, "Black like you." And he literally skidded the car because he's suffering from cognitive dissonance, and it's making us separate from whom what we are lovingly. If you're looking in the face in your mirror and you're seeing an image of the devil subconsciously, if you're seeing that good, the image of a good God is a white man, the opposite of good is bad or evil. The opposite of God is devil or the Satan. The opposite of white is black, and the opposite of man is woman. So when you're displaying God as a good white man, unconsciously, subconsciously, your level of, especially when you talk about good and evil in a polarity, which does not exist in African traditional culture, once you do that, you're going to view yourself as negative. In fact, the word negative means black. Nega means black. Negro, night. But absence of light means black. So all of these things that were put on us, the colors, even that don't count. You are from a place. You're a Igbo. You're Ewe. You're Yoruba. You come from a place. You're a people with a history. That form of discovery and self-love is deep. So when Jesus is put before the Sadducees or the Pharisees and they ask him what's the greatest laws of Moses, he said, worship the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and strength. And then love your neighbor as you love yourself. So watch this. Worship the Lord thy God. He didn't say worship the Lord my God. He said worship the Lord thy God, your God. Olodumare, yeah, Chineke, Chuku, yeah, whether it come from Kemet, from where it is. What is your God? What is the creator? What is the, and then you go to Kemet, the name for the creator is the Netta. It's where you get the term nature. NTR, they put in the English alphabet. Netta, the nature. That's why natural accidents today are called acts of God. And we need to get a natural act of God and get back to loving our natural self, your God given features. And every day I'm in the battle with my negative element when I look at myself in the mirror. And what do? Are you too black? Are you too light? Are you too this, too that? Pulled all kinds of ways. But what I do know is that I'm Paul. I've been here on a mission. I'm Paul Obina. I'm here to synthesize and live and have respect for the African, respect for the European, respect for those who are natural and living there, and to build that kind of that sense of self up. So the first thing I'd say to you, self-love is vital, and it covers, as I'm trying to say there, it covers many things. So hopefully, my daughter, she's working on it and she's helping. She's a early years specialist. She's helping, children come through in their own, working with her own children. And then my son, he's 16 years old. He questions. I had to make him media literate because the things you were asking before, this generation, the media literate, they can do all kinds of things with the computer. So he, from young, well, let's see this, by the age of 12, he could decipher and break down 18 films with the violence or the sex or whatever. I haven't shown him porn, but pornographic violence is right in there. So, for instance, when he was on this, he gave me a breakdown on how he found the TV series Adolescence. And he was talking about, he brought in about Jordan Peterson, he brought in about Andrew Tate and the manosphere. He started brokering this thing about toxic masculinity and how the balances and imbalances are there within society. Then another thing he brought in was Travis Bickle. Travis Bickle, Robert De Niro's character in Taxi Driver from 1974, a film that we watched about maybe 8 months ago. And then when he was actually talking there about Travis Bickle, he was talking about how he was considered a hero when he gets into the violence. But that is pornographic violence. The tools of pornographic violence are the gun and the knife. And there's an article, Sunday Times article, which was talking about that. And so we watch pornography, but where it's violence, it's more acceptable from where it's sex. So there's all manner of things about the power of that reasoning, respect, and responsibility. I'm pleased to say so far my son is able to analyze. I'm touching wood. He can analyze those things, but he's only 16. Let's see what becomes of him.
Wow, Paul, we've uncovered and touched on so many things. Thank you for sharing. I mean, you talked about self-love, you talked about knowledge of self, you talked about the vagus nerve, you talked about Ma'at, you talked about timelines, you talked about Set and the rebirth. But it's been a pleasure to hear you. I wish we even had more time to decipher a lot. But I think what we could do is potentially look at another date and time to bring you back so we can kind of peel apart and kind of get further down into some of these concepts, because clearly a lot of the information that you have, I realize you're also trying to compress. And I think the message does need to get out. So we'll probably need to, consider having or recording another episode. What would you like the audience to know? I think as you wrap up, I guess the question is, one, where would the audience find your work? If I wanted to say, listen, where would you find Paul Obina? Where would we find your work? What projects do you have coming up? What handles do you have on social media? But how do we follow up, or how does the audience find you and look at your work?
Well, I just we've got a. I'm saying it's my good friend's daughter just put together a website for me finally. Um, so it's called lineageinnovations.com. And at lineageinnovations.com, you can purchase the timeline and start populating it with information and articles, etc., and links, more importantly. So that's where I go. And I'm hoping that as I was speaking, I wasn't coming across negative. You notice I say about the promotion of self-love. I'm not talking about overcoming self-hate. You understand me? I'm trying my best to.
No,
Do you know?
no, that's fine. I don't. I'm happy with what we have. This is obviously
No. What?
telling some of the audience who you are. I don't. No, that's fine. As in,
Okay.
you don't. It's not. It's not. I think what I aim to do is to have a natural conversation, and that's what we had. So, um,
Right.
it's not with the way you expressed yourself has been. I
See. Look.
I welcomed it because obviously, we this is a safe enough space to explain that. But I do.
Right.
Um, that's why we obviously had the session. But let me just thank you, and then we'll thank the
What?
audience
What I
for.
say? Do you know what I'm saying? The phenomenal piece of information I heard from you today was when you're talking about the vibrations of the words and that whole empowering that, because we taught negative words and to think in the negative. So there's a thing, what's it called? Malefic Santi. He has this consciousness towards oppression and consciousness towards victory. And he calls it the twin pillars of consciousness. And many people, they're going to be dwelling on the negativity. And I try my best to go to victorious thought that the problem had to be solved. The problem has to be solved. So it's about solving the issue. So I've not taught my son, for instance, to he's going to I don't talk to him all the time about he knows the negatives are there because he just has to listen to the ongoing threads in society. But we always talk very positively and with humor, lightheartedness. And
I
then
think,
when he has to be serious, he's serious, yeah?
yeah, that's important. That's important. Well, we would obviously like to thank all the listeners, thank the audience. We'll record another session and have Paul come back. But thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to having you on another episode.
Thank you, sir.